I can't actually see as well on these when I'm on the screen, but I think I look better. So there we
go. And this is OmniDog's Vault, and I am OmniDog. Welcome to our interview with writer Andy Diggle. And I'm OmniDog. This is Taylor, the Minister of Comics. And Andy Diggle, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well, and we just found out that we can talk about everything you've written, but we can't talk about anything that's in the pipeline for you. But the good news is there's stuff in the pipeline for you.
Yes, I'm currently working on a couple of projects, both of which are under NDAs and haven't been announced yet. So I've been warned I'm not allowed to talk about them. So sorry. Hopefully later this year I'll be able to you'll be the first to know as soon as it's on the public record. But
well, you'll give us an excuse to talk to you at another point once those things are fully disclosed. So there you go.
I'd rather be doing this than working, so it works out for both of us, I think.
I agree. So what I want to talk, first of all, I think I don't want to speak for Taylor, but I know Taylor feels the same way I do, that we are really enamored with the James Bond series in general. And I think we really like your books in particular, Kill Chain and Hammerhead. And you'll notice there's no editing in this. I hold up the books, and that's how, because I don't like any editing. It's like real work, and I try to avoid that like the plague. So in these books, you tried to get back to his roots, sort of like what how Ian Fleming wrote him.
Yeah, the premise was, when I was first approached, I mean, obviously, when I was first approached, they said it's James Bond, and before they'd said anything else, I just said yes, because that's one of those characters I'm automatically just going to say yes to. But the premise is that it's Fleming's Bond, the Bond of the books, but set in the present day. And that to me is kind of the best of both worlds, because obviously the Fleming Bond's kind of kind of pure old school stuff, but some of it looks kind of dated now when you read the books, and it doesn't have a lot of the kind of extravagance, and frankly a lot of the kind of tropes that we think are part of the Bond franchise. Nowadays we think of the Aston Martin and the Martinis and the Walter PPK and stuff. But that stuff wasn't really highlighted particularly in the books. It was just more sort of straight spy adventures. And I think, the Bond movies in a way have become kind of a cliche, almost like when some of these cliches become parodied by Austin Powers and stuff, maybe it's time to freshen up the franchise a little bit, And I think that, so with the comic, the idea of taking the spirit of the Fleming character, but just presenting him in the present day world, as complex, this post-Soviet Union world, as complicated and messy as it is. For me, that's really interesting. I draw a lot of inspiration from, present day kind of geopolitics and stuff like that. You can probably tell from my Twitter feed, I pay a lot of attention to what's going on. And so I really relish the chance to be able to try and, do a good old fashioned spy adventure story, but also make it maybe just a little bit more relevant than it otherwise might have been. Because I mean, Fleming was writing stories set in his present day, and each, especially in the movies, one of the benefits of being able to change actor as you go through, the decades of Bond movies is that you can kind of keep freshening them up and make them relevant for whatever time period they're in. But what the movies also did, unfortunately, was they replaced Smersh for the most part, the Russian enemies of Bond, then Soviet Union, kind of like the sort of the arch enemy of MI6. Most of the movies replaced those with Spectre, which is just the kind of criminal organization. And so the movies took the politics out. I don't know if that was a deliberate effort to make them more commercial worldwide or something like that. I don't know if they figured they were going, hey, we won't be able to sell them in the Soviet Union. I don't imagine that was it, but it seemed to me, and when I looked at, I mean, obviously Warren Ellis had done the Bond comics before me, so I obviously started off by reading what he had done, and he hadn't really had much of a Russian angle in there. And I was very interested at the time. I'd been studying. This was like 2015, 2016, early 2016, I think it was, when I started researching that would be for Kill Chain, actually, for researching Kill Chain, my second story. And I was paying attention to what the Russians were doing in Ukraine at the time, using kind of fake news and cyber attacks and all this kind of stuff. And I thought it was really interesting. Like, well, what would happen if they start doing that in the West? And then, of course, they did. Right. But at the time, nobody was talking about Russian interference, but it seemed to me like a perfect way to bring Smersh back, to bring back, the great arch enemy of Fleming's Bond, but also make it kind of relevant to the present day. And then I'm not claiming any particular prescience or whatever. I was just paying attention to what they were doing. But those techniques the Russians were using in Ukraine, they then started using against Britain and America. And here we are.
It feels like the Cold War has reignited almost again.
But in a different kind of way. It's like we thought we won when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed. But instead the enemy kind of mutated, because we thought we would make Russia like the West. They would all be capitalists now and everybody's happy because we're one big happy family. And instead, like it's the money, that basically the Russian oligarchs stole from their own people, started bleeding its way our way. Through money laundering and dark money and all this kind of stuff. And they started using that to kind of corrupt our institutions. So it was kind of like it kind of, instead of being like an obvious Cold War, it kind of sort of went underground a little bit and became more about corruption and organized crime. And they started kind of, intelligence agencies and criminal organizations started to kind of blur together in a way in Russia that wasn't immediately apparent, I think, to people in the West who weren't paying attention. So it's kind of slightly scary stuff, and we're seeing the end results of it now. We're kind of living through the end results of it now. But it also makes great inspiration for spy stories.
It's been several months since I read Kill Chain, but I think the storyline did involve drones to a particular extent. And that's another thing. When you study that, that's pretty scary to realize how many drones are out there and what they can do to you if they're pointed against you.
Yeah, I mean, and like we sort of think over here that, it's only a matter of time before somebody uses drones in a terrorist attack. But of course, in the Middle East, they already are using them. I mean, they've been used widely in Syria and stuff like that. There were like Saudi oil installations that were blown up using drones carrying explosives. So it's in pipelines and stuff. So it's already happening. It's just not necessarily happening here yet. But I'm sure it's only a matter of time.
So besides the current geopolitical landscape, what preparation did you do for writing these Bond books? Like, what movies did you go back to? What books did you go back to get yourself in that James Bond mindset?
I read the books again. The great thing is, because the Ian Fleming estate is signing off, they're behind the Dynamite series. They've got to sign off on everything. So the first thing they did was send me like a big box of all of the Fleming Bond books. So now I've got these beautiful new editions of them. So I just kind of worked my way through them again. I'd read, not all of them, I'd read most of them in my teens. But it was good to just kind of refresh my memory, because that was a long time ago now, because I'm super old. But it was striking how kind of low key they were, compared to what we think of as Bond, because nowadays we think of, like, I don't know, maybe not so much with the Craig Bonds, but the stuff I grew up with was, it's all volcano bases and laser sharks and, this kind of stuff. And it just kind of, going back to like, somebody, he has a fight with somebody and then goes and has dinner. And that was as exciting as it got. But, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean? It didn't have that kind of that over-the-top extravagance that we think of those movies as having. And so I thought that, but I like that. I like the realism of it. I like the fact that it's down to earth. I mean, my favorite Bond movies are like the early ones, the early Connerys, where they didn't feel like they were too over the top. Dr. No has got your great villain with a secret base and a nefarious plan to destroy the world kind of thing. And then From Russia with Love is just like pure espionage. It's just a good old-fashioned Cold War espionage story with one of the best and most realistic fight scenes they ever did. The fight in the train with Robert Shaw, I think is fantastic because it's so brutal and kind of that kind of claustrophobia of it, the tight space. And then I think with Goldfinger, they took both of those two things, the kind of, crazy megalomaniac supervillain and the straight brutal espionage story, and they kind of put them together. And so for me, I think that like Goldfinger is like my all-time favorite because that's like when they kind of finally perfected the formula for Bond, And it feels to me that everything since then is basically a remake of Goldfinger in one way or another.
And by far the best villain death.
Mix. Sorry.
No, it's by far the best villain death of any Bond movie. That's for sure. For Goldfinger.
Yeah, absolutely. Sucked out of the plane window. Yeah, they kind of tried to repeat that one with Drax, didn't they, in Moonraker? But it didn't quite, like, seeing Bond in space just doesn't quite have that realism that I like in my stuff. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, yeah, I know Star Wars was big, but even so, feels a bit much for me.
It's got the best song, I think, of all the Bond movies with Shirley Bassey. That I can listen to that song because I think I'm older than you are. I can listen to that song over and over and over again. Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah. I used to when I was a teenager, I had the like a soundtrack of like all of the Bond title music, and I used to listen to it incessantly. I love that. I really like the Jack White Alicia Keys one that everybody hates. All of the Bond fans absolutely despise that track, but I actually kind of really like it. But maybe, I don't know, that's just me.
Well, you're in a no judgment zone here. We don't. I love the Chris Cornell Casino Royale song.
That's a great title sequence too, isn't it? The animated playing cards. That felt like a statement of intent, of kind of like, okay, we're going to make a movie about James Bond playing cards. Deal with it. Rather than, having to completely change. Obviously, the movie is, the whole novel is basically just like a part of the film because they needed more to flesh it out. But yeah, I think I like the fact that it didn't shy away from, he's just going to play cards for most of this story. It's not your traditional, what you've come to expect from a Bond movie. But I thought that title sequence really just sold that really beautifully.
And I think that his first registered kill in the bathroom, to me, that was, you said the fight scene on the train was the most brutal. That fight scene in the bathroom, and I don't want to turn this into a James Bond movie discussion, but seemed extremely real to me. Like that's how it would go. Just trying your best to try and kill this guy and using everything you possibly can. And instead of, Sean Connery just smoothly knocking some guy off, Daniel Craig is just ramming him all over the place in this bathroom and struggling. Yeah, and that was really real to me.
And there were no puns. Like when he threw the heater into the bathtub, shocking. there was none of that.
Yeah. No, that's the thing, because like you want to get the balance. On the one hand, I like that kind of brutal, ugly, because when you see a real fight, when you see a couple of drunk guys fighting in the car park outside the bar, then it's never like in the movies. It's always really ugly and messy and awkward, and just looks kind of stupid, But I think, and I like to have a sort of, I like it to feel real. And like violence is ugly, and I think violence, it should be ugly in fiction, So I've written a lot of violence. I write action comics, So I'm always kind of writing these extremely violent scenes, But I'm not like, I don't like kung fu movies. I don't like seeing kind of violence as almost like a dance where like I think it should look brutal and ugly. But then, and for me, that kind of sums up the thing that kind of makes Bond special is that weird. The contrast between that kind of ugly brutality of violence that he commits, contrasted with this suave lounge lizard kind of demeanor that he has when he kind of straightens his tie and fixes his cuffs and then kind of orders a martini. You know what I mean? And I think again, like the beginning of Casino Royale remake was again it's like a statement of intent, giving us that kind of starting off with Bond as thug, and he will mess you up, and it will. And it'll kind of like, he doesn't look suave doing it, but then it's like through the course of the film, he learns to become that guy who looks good in the tux, In fact, it was lovely when Vesper just kind of like, she produces this tuxedo for him and he's like, this is tailored. And she's like, I measured you the moment I looked at you or something like this, And it's almost like she's teaching him how to be suave, And then in the final shot of Casino Royale where we have the pan up and he's wearing Connery's, suit from Goldfinger, and he's like James Bond, and then the classic theme kicks in, and it's like, okay, he's big. It's like an origin story, and almost like he's almost like now he's put on his superhero costume. He's kind of he's become the Bond we always knew he would be, sort of thing.
Before we move on to our anything else, I just wanted to ask you one question about Kill Chain. First of all, Taylor, do you have yours autographed by?
I do not. I feel jealous now.
Now, just for the viewers out there, this is what a signed book plate should look like, not the crappy piece of crap I got from Fantagraphics for Peter Baggy's hate.
The Holiday Inn notepad.
Yeah, the Holiday Inn notepad with his name on it slipped in the box.
It's authentic, man. It's authentic. He's keeping it real. I
This-
won't have anybody dissing Peter Bagg on this show.
Well, that's why I paid extra, because I wanted a signed bookplate by him. I loved hate. And I just don't think Fantagraphics went about it the right way, just tossing in his signature for full price. But I did have a question about James Bond in this one scene where he's at the bar.
Oh, yeah.
And he's drinking Jim Beam.
Yeah.
Would James Bond really?
Bourbon, but I didn't. I said a bottle of. As I recall, the script says something like he's drinking a fine bourbon, but I didn't specify the brand. But I clearly should have specified something a little bit more high end than Jim Beam.
Okay.
Ironically, because Warren Ellis had dug out a particularly fine bourbon that he obviously sent reference to Jason Masters for the first books, and we see it it's like old Grandpappy's or something like that. I can't remember what it was called now. But yeah, I should have specified.
Well, James Bond can't just drink martinis all the time. That gets pretty boring, drinking martinis every single time you go to the bar.
Well, this is the thing, that these things are all kind of references to Fleming, because he was a bourbon drinker in the books. Obviously he drank a variety of different things. There's a lot of descriptions of drinks and meals in the books, but there's the whole vodka martini thing. The Vesper Lindas it became wasn't really a huge deal in the books, any more than the Walther PPK wasn't a huge deal to start with. He had I think it was a Colt 45 in his glove compartment of his car in the earliest book. So yeah, like I say, there's a lot of little Easter eggs in there. The one thing I did dig up reference for Luca, the artist, Luca Casalanguida, was the brand of cigarettes he smokes, which I think, as I recall, it was Morley, which they don't exist anymore. But it's an old British brand, obviously imported tobacco, and so I did Google visual reference for that old cigarette packet and send it to him. So there's another scene where we just see him sitting alone in a room with a dead body having a bit of a think, and he just lights up. And I wanted to make sure that the cigarette brand was in there. Just as nobody, it doesn't mean anything to anybody unless they're a real hardcore Bond fan, at which point they'll go, I know what you did there. Okay, nice one. You're paying attention. Good. Doing your homework.
And do you have more Bond ideas rattling around your mind? I really hope we can see another mini-series from you. If you can't say anything, that's perfectly fine. But I would love to see that mini-series.
I would love to do more Bond. But Dynamite said, they said no, we're good for now. I think they seem to be basically wanting to try and get as many different creative teams doing Bond as possible, which fair enough. They want to get like a whole variety of different voices and art styles and stuff, and I think that's entirely cool. I like seeing that stuff. So yeah, but I do have ideas for what I would do. I've got an idea for something I would like to do, which would be a bit more global in scope, and it would have a bit more of that over-the-top swagger and a bit more of a supervillain with an evil plan kind of thing. But there's also a part of my brain that's thinking, maybe I'll just do that for myself. And maybe it's not even a comic, maybe it's a novel. Like I say, because obviously I like the spy genre. I'm a big fan of Bond and Mission Impossible and all this kind of stuff, but also the more kind of grounded and realistic stuff. Not so much, like Le Carre. I'm obviously Le Carre is a genius, and I love that stuff. But hey, it's me, so it's going to have exploding helicopters in it. So I was just thinking, but you've seen me do it in things like The Losers and stuff like that as well. So I've got this idea that I think maybe it might be a novel, or maybe like a series of novels about modern day espionage and the world we live in, and conspiracies and. But it'll also have lots of gunfights and car chases and all that good stuff. But I want, but something that's a little bit more relevant. So yeah, but I'm always talking about things I never get around to doing because I actually have to pay the bills and do the stuff I'm paid for first. I'm not good at multitasking, but that's definitely in the back of my mind.
Well, you talked about my favorite. I do love James Bond. My favorite comic of yours is The Losers, which we reviewed several months ago. That was fantastic. I would like to hear a little bit about the origins of how that story came to be. I know it was an old DC title that you kind of retrofitted for yourself for Vertigo.
Yeah, it was a funny one because it didn't really start off as being The Losers. When I first approached, I could talk all night about this. I'll try and keep it reasonably brief. Basically, when I first sort of approached Vertigo, I'd asked Garth Ennis for advice because I knew him from working on 2000 AD together when I was editing. And he knew that I was a big Vertigo fan. I was a huge fan of Vertigo, and I really wanted to write for Vertigo because it really felt like the kind of comics I've always responded to and wanted to write myself. And the best piece of advice I've ever got was from Garth, and he said, well, if you want to do that stuff, send it to Will Dennis. He's the guy who's doing the kind of stuff that you like, and so I did. Me and Jock had done a like Lenny Zero at 2000 AD, or the Judge Dredd magazine. And we kind of used that as a calling card. It was just a short 10-page story, but the readers had dug it, and me and Jock had hit it off. And yeah, so I said, I think I sent Will a couple of short pitches, just like half a page each or a page each, something like that. They were for crime miniseries. I think like 4-issue miniseries, or just original ideas. And he sent me a really nice, I guess it would have been an email I got back. Or was it a letter? I can't remember now. It's a long time ago, 20 years. But he was very straight with me. He just said, well, look, I like your stuff, but you're not a name. I can't commission creator-owned stuff from you right now because you don't have the track record, which is entirely reasonable. He said, but if there's something like we're looking for that you'd be interested in, then maybe you could pitch for it. And I think that, so initially that led to Lady Constantine. He'd been asked to commission a Lady Constantine mini. And he was very straight with me. He said, look, we are inviting pitches from other people too. So, it's not a slam dunk, but, I sent him my take on that, and that got greenlit. And then they were kind of like, okay, so that opened the door a little bit more. And I went back to this original idea of I really want to do kind of crime and action type stuff. So what can we do? And I was very inspired by Johnny Double, what Azzarello and Riso had done with Johnny Double. There was a great little crime miniseries they did together, which was nominally based on some character from Showcase or something. I don't know. I was never familiar with. It might even just have been a short story or something. I genuinely don't know. But the way it would work was that that you can just find some completely obscure old character, just as long as it's owned by DC, and then revamp it and kind of do what you want with it. So we kind of racked our brains for weeks trying to think of some old character or characters that we could dig up and then reboot in this kind of crimey, kind of heisty, Mission Impossible kind of, or Elmore, and mixed with sort of a slightly Elmore Leonard-y kind of vibe that I was wanting to write. And we couldn't really think of anything. And then I remember one evening, Will rang me up at home and said, "Have you ever heard of The Losers?" And I said, well, no, I've literally never heard of them, but that's a great title. I just really, really like the title, The Losers. And so I basically looked it up, found out, who they were, what the deal was, and thought, yeah, no, I can work with this. So my initial approach when I first pitched The Losers, it was just going to be a mini series, and it was going to be set in the 1950s. For those of your viewers who don't know, the Losers was like this war comic written by Robert Kanigher back in the 70s. Was it the 70s when it started off? I think so. And basically, it's kind of like war heroes, basically, who would always be at the thick end of the fighting in World War II, and always they were kind of underdog, hard luck hero types, And I think in official DC continuity, they were supposed to have died in the last day of World War II. I was like, my thinking was, well, if they all died at the end of the war, what if they didn't really die? What if we pick them up when it's the 1950s and everybody thinks they're dead? They think they're KIA, and then they get back together again to do like a heist or something like this that's tied up to the idea was going to be that at the end of World War II, they had helped smuggle German scientists out of Europe, rocket scientists, and those rocket scientists ended up working on the American rocket program in the 50s. But they'd also discover that those scientists know where there's a cache of hidden Nazi gold. So in order to get the gold, they've got to go and get the German scientists out of Los Alamos or something like that, where they're working on the atomic weapons project. And it was kind of like the original versions of Ocean's 11, the Sinatra version. That crew, they were all ex-military. right? They'd all been together in the war. And so basically I stole that idea, just the idea of these ex-military guys getting together after the war to pull a heist. And it would have been fun. I still think that there's something there that would be, you could make a really fun story out of that. But then we realized that, what was it? Two things. Howard Chaykin was doing American Century, which was like a 50s based crime story. And Garth Ennis was doing war stories at DC at the time, which was covered the war angle. So it kind of felt like both of those bases were already covered. And we'd just be kind of like, we're kind of repeating the kind of story that Vertigo's already doing. So in the end, we just thought, well, let's just take the title and throw everything else away and just start again from scratch. You know, as long as it's still called The Losers, DC can still own it. So I pitched a new version, which was a similar kind of story, but it was tied up with, originally it was going to be more to do with the history of the CIA in South America. Like the character who became Aisha was originally going to be a Colombian FARC rebel. And it was going to be more tied up with the history of the CIA propping up, like, you know, right-wing dictatorships and so on in South America, that they get mixed up in. And again, it was just going to be a mini series. And after once I pitched it, the powers, I didn't really think it would get greenlit. And I ended up with a much better problem, which was like, they said, well, we like it, but we want you to make it an ongoing series. And I was like, well, great, you know, that's a good problem to have. But it was an interesting story challenge because like my original story for it had been, I love heist movies, you know, heist stories generally. And I'm kind of a structure freak, you know, story structure. And like heists always have a very specific structure. It's kind of like planning, recruitment, execution, everything goes wrong. And then they desperately try and get out of it by the skin of their teeth. And then by the end of it, they've either succeeded or failed, but the story's over. Okay. But how do you turn that into an ongoing series? You know, you can't do the 30 issues of one heist. So I had to figure out a way of making it basically an ongoing series of heists. Now, obviously, they're not all literally heists, you know, but you know, structurally, that's the kind of approach I had. So that's when I came up with the idea of the bad guy, Max. They just need some ultimate goal. And they've got to do all of these other missions along the way, all building towards finding out where this guy is and, you know, clearing their names and finding this guy and stopping his evil plan and so on. And sort of, you know, things became more complicated as it went along. But yeah, but that was the basic premise. I knew I wanted to do something that had the sort of, you know, the action of like an Indiana Jones movie or something like that. But give it a slightly, not exact. I wanted to give it like a hard, you know, a sort of hard hitting action, but also like slightly tongue in cheek Elmore Leonard kind of dialogue where just, you know, make it kind of cool, you know, but also hopefully slightly relevant, you know. So there's a little bit of a kind of anti-neoconservative thing going on in there too, but most people don't really notice. Well, at least in terms of Max's plan, anyway.
And I don't want to butter you up, but I legitimately think The Losers has one of the best final pages in comic history. I remember laughing out loud when that page because it was so satisfying. It was so funny. At what point did you know that was the final page of the series? That was the final image.
It was fairly late on, actually, fairly late on. But I do remember that when I was writing the final issue, I was so looking forward to writing that final page that I'd only written about the first 3 or 4 pages of the issue, and then I was like, no, I've got to write the last scene first because I've got to just. It's almost like that became like the anchor for writing the rest of the issue because I knew how that last scene was going to play out. And it's one of those, sometimes you can just see and hear the scene so clearly in your head that it's just kind of waiting to come out. And so I just wrote it just like straight out, like boom. And I was so pleased with it. I was grinning. And also I got to write the end before I'd actually finished the issue. But it was nice, kind of like, okay, I've finished now. The rest of it's just tidying up, you know, writing the, you know, 20 pages in the middle or whatever. But yeah, but it was, it was like a light bulb moment when I realized that was the perfect way to end it, you know. Leading up to it looks like they're going to get recruited for a whole new mission, and then it's kind of like, nah, not happening. And in the end, John gave the artwork for that page to Will Dennis, the original commissioning editor. It was back in the old days when, you know, art was hand lettered, you know, actually onto the artwork rather than digitally. So he got it framed and it was hanging in his office at DC before he left.
The last page?
The last page, yeah. Will's got it.
And he had it framed in his office?
Yep.
That's great.
I'm jealous. I would
You
love
come
to
to
have that jock page in particular. Be fantastic to have.
That page is great.
Yeah.
What was it like? Just as it got optioned and it was made into a big movie, what kind of experience did you have with that?
It was became amazing towards the end when we actually got to go and visit the set and so on. It got the option had rolled over so many times that we just thought it was never going to happen. Excuse me. And I foolishly, I hate disappointment so much that it makes me very pessimistic. I would rather be a pessimist than be disappointed. So my natural inclination is always just to assume that these good things are never going to happen, and then it'll be a pleasant surprise if they do. And I was kind of in that mindset, and we got a bit of, me and John got a little bit of option money each year when it got optioned, but didn't get greenlit. And then eventually it did get greenlit. But I'd waited so long and I'd become so pessimistic about it that I'd actually signed an exclusive contract with Marvel when the Losers got greenlit. So I wasn't actually available to cash in on it and by doing more DC stuff at the time anyway, which was entirely my fault. It was I should have had more faith. But me and Jock weren't directly involved in the development of the movie because it's not creator-owned comic. A lot of people assume it is, but it's not. It's DC. But we did become friendly with Jamie Vanderbilt, the screenwriter who was adapting it, and he was kind enough to sort of send us drafts of the screenplay as he was doing them. But that was an interesting process in itself. It was quite educational because initially, when it was going to be originally it was going to be like Warner Brothers funding it, in which had that happened, had the terms of the original option been greenlit, then me and Jock would have made a lot of money. It would have been like instantly paying off my mortgage. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, and the kind of film went from being like an $80 million film to a $50 million film to a $25 million film. And each draft that Jamie sent us, you could see like all the stuff had to cut out of this draft because it was just too expensive to film. Like the first draft's got in fact, Peter Berg wrote the really early drafts, and then Jamie kind of rewrote from that. But yeah, there's kind of like a helicopter gunship battle. There's a gunship chasing the Losers when they're in a car, and it's got Cougar kind of leaning out with a sniper rifle and taking out the gunship as they're driving through the middle of the city. It's all this crazy stuff, and it's great, but they couldn't afford it. So it was slightly deflating seeing, even though I loved what Jamie did in the script, he really got the characters and he kind of made them zing. And I think he really built up Roke into a much more interesting character than I'd written, frankly. He made him much more human. But it was slightly deflating seeing, the scale of it sort of dwindle through the course of the process. But that, Hollywood budgets is how it works.
Was it ever going to be rated R? Was that ever an option? With it being, because your comic is really hard R with the exploding heads and everything. Was there ever like a script where it was like, this is going to be a hard R?
I don't think so. No. I'm trying to think back, trying to give you an honest answer and remember what the early drafts were like. I got the feeling they always wanted it to be reasonably family friendly. I mean, so the first thing was kind of like not too violent. It's okay for everybody to be shooting guns around as long as it doesn't look like that hurts anybody, which is, forgive me, but a very American point of view. Guns are fine, nobody gets hurt. Sex is bad, but guns are fine. Sorry. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, I would have liked to have seen a slightly harder edge to it. But I've got like a weird sense of humor. Like I said before, I think violence should be ugly, but it's kind of ugly and cool and scary and funny, kind of all at the same time. Like the kind of Tarantino thing where it's kind of a mixture of and it's slightly contradictory. And I kind of like that sort of vibe. And instead, they kind of went with this rather soft comedic approach, which I think maybe made the action less exciting. I mean, some of the film's really funny. Don't get me wrong. I think the cast are fantastic. They couldn't have cast it better. Those guys, they're all now megastars anyway, off their own talent. But yeah, I've got nothing bad to say about the cast. I think they're wonderful. And I think the script is very funny. I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more hard edge to the action, I think. Just a bit more sense of threat. I like that. I was just thinking about this earlier. I was thinking about the Indiana Jones films. I'm not really a huge fan of the sequels. Raiders of the Lost Ark, for me, has got a real sense of threat to it. And it's got its funny moments and stuff, but there's a kind of menace to it. Whereas the sequels feel, especially Last Crusade, for me, feels too comedic. It kind of, and that softens the action. I want to feel, you want to be scared of the Nazis, not laugh at them when they fall in the river. You know what I mean? At least that's me anyway.
Yeah.
And I love Chris Evans in that movie. He was like spot on. He looks exactly like Jock's drawing from the comic. And I think Jason Patric, the Max that he did was so much different from the comic, but I think he's one of the most underrated villains in film history. I think he was hilarious in that movie in a really twisted way.
I mean, he's a terrific actor, and he's a real serious actor. He takes it very seriously. And I don't know this, but I suspect he probably thought it was a little bit beneath him. But there's a sort of slightly resigned disdain in the way, in his delivery, which I think actually really works for the character. He's kind of like, oh, the people I've got to deal with kind of vibe to it. And I think that really works. It's very dry, and I love it. But yes, I mean, Chris Evans, I mean, they're all fantastic, but Chris Evans in particular is he just makes that sing. When me and Jock actually got to meet them on set in Puerto Rico, and when we first walked on set, Zoe Saldana came over to say hi and introduce us to everybody. And she was like, hey, Jensen, get over here. And she actually referred to him by his character name. And then Chris Evans walks up in costume, and he's wearing the pink petunias T-shirt and the little round glasses and the little soul patch and everything. And I swear to God, he looked like he just stepped out of the comic. And the look on Jock's face was incredible, because Jock had designed this character. He'd drawn him, and then it was like he was seeing his own creation walk towards him, and his jaw was open, it's like, you're the guy, you're the guy I made, It was a very strange but wonderful experience. And they were all like so nice. They, we basically sort of went back to Chris Evans's trailer and hung out for hours, and they were like, they all went out of their way to make us feel welcome and comfortable. And yeah, like really, really, Chris Evans has now got this reputation as just being like, the nicest guy. And it's absolutely true. He really is that guy.
That is great to hear. I love hearing that kind of back office type story where you get a real feel for who the person is, because there's plenty of stories about people being jerks, but it's refreshing to find out that somebody really is a really good guy.
Yeah. And they're just like a lovely bunch. Yeah. And I was just like, I love the fact that they were cast for the characters as well. They didn't try and rewrite the script to suit like some A-list star who wanted it to make it a vehicle for himself. The actors all were cast for the roles, and they all inhabited those roles like they were straight out of the comic. And we really appreciated and respected that. It was great.
Well, you seem to have a really not perfect, but you've got you seem to have a very organic relationship with Jock, not only with the Losers, but with Green Arrow Year One, which is not signed. But I love this book, and my first question is something that everybody's asked you, and I just have to. I know what I'm going to ask you. How cool was it to have a character named after you in the show?
It's very weird. Honestly, it's very I just wish I had the abs. You know what I mean? It's kind of like people see me in real life. Like, oh, it always looks slightly disappointed. Sorry, I'm not that guy. But I think it was Mark Guggenheim who named the character after me for the show. And he gave the character a brother called, it was John Diggle in the show, but he gave him a brother called Andy, or the other way around. Anyway, there's Andy and John in the show. And I actually have a brother called John. Mark didn't know that when he named both characters after us in the show. But yeah, so like my brother, who is not a nerd and doesn't read comics and has no idea about any of this stuff, but yeah, he's now got a John Diggle action figure.
and he was the good guy and you're the bad guy.
Yeah, there you go. That actually checks out.
And not just getting a character named after you, I think Green Arrow Year One is influential for the whole series, especially the first season. Just that origin story of him on the island. That must have been a thrill to see some of that come to life, with China White too being a character come to life.
It was very cool. When we first saw, Jock, I think, had got access to some of the like sort of early footage of it somehow. And he sent me like a little MOV file of just, some bits of of like, you know, Ollie on the island, and he's just basically, again, he looks like he just stepped out of the comic. You know, they really, obviously there's a lot more to it because they're tying him into the wider, you know, the Arrowverse as it's become now. But yeah, but that early island stuff, it really, yeah, no, it was nice to see that they were kind of channeling what we've been doing with it. I've never really been very good at, you know, the whole superhero continuity thing. You know, I didn't really grow up reading that kind of comic, and I don't have this encyclopedic knowledge of all the continuity and stuff. So I always feel like a bit of an outsider doing that stuff. But there's benefits to that too, because sometimes it means if I can step in and do a self-contained story, and I think Green Arrow Year One is a good example of this when it works. It's kind of like I can just do a slightly different take, and I don't have to worry too much about tying it in to other stuff. You know, and I was very straight with them when I pitched it. I was like, this isn't a superhero story. This is First Blood. You know, this is kind of like a story about a man in the wild staying alive, kind of thing. Yeah, obviously there's, you know, Robinson Crusoe and stuff like that. But I really wanted to have a kind of grounded, believable quality to it, so that it could escalate. You know, so that like to start off, like he's got absolutely no idea what he's doing. He's kind of this kind of like rich, drunk idiot, you know, who had a talent for archery but squandered it, and is now just this spoiled brat. And so, yeah, because the nice thing about doing an origin story is you can give the character an arc. You know, you can show him grow and change and learn his lesson, and then become the character he's sort of destined to be. You know, and it means that by starting him off as being this rather hapless character, you don't only get to see him grow and change, but also you can kind of like scale up the action. So that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, the end of a James Cameron movie. Like the last 45 minutes of any James Cameron movie is like always the most exciting thing you've ever seen, you know. And I wanted to have that kind of structure to it, so it gets bigger and more exciting as it goes along. And if you're doing like an ongoing monthly book, you can't do that because everything's got to be exciting all the time, you know. So yeah, I think I probably do have a bit of a sort of cinematic sense of story structure, which again is a sort of a strength and a weakness. On a book like that, I think everything worked. Everything, obviously, Jock, perfect guy for drawing it. You know, I did warn him when he said, you know, because we talk a lot. You know, I'd mentioned to him that I had this thing brewing, and he said, "I'd love to draw that," and I was like, "I'd love you to draw it, but you do bear in mind that you'll be drawing jungle in almost every panel of this book, right? You're going to go insane drawing leaves and trees. It's going to be a nightmare to draw because it's easy to write, you know, he runs through the jungle, but then the poor artist has got to draw every leaf on those trees, you know." And he was like, no, it's fine. I've got a shorthand, you know. And I was like, well, you say so? And then if you look at it, like he just suggests jungle with a few simple lines and splats of you know, an inky brush and so on, and it becomes amazing. Yeah, and just his use of silhouettes and negative space and stuff like this, and obviously a beautiful coloring job too.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, it's one of those books where everything clicked, and it's like we knew it was working while we were doing it. Sometimes, especially when you're writing, you don't always know if it's going to work. Yes. I think you can tell when I'm having fun writing a book. I think it showed. I really had fun writing that one because I knew it was working.
Yeah, so what is your professional collaborative relationship like with Jock? Like, do you guys call on the phone a lot and talk things out? Like, do you have like a full script for him, or how does that really work with you guys? Because every artist and writer works different.
Sorry, I talked over you.
Oh, no, you're good.
I do full script for everything. I think like I always do like an outline first. I mean, usually because we're mates anyway, he's usually, you know, will have talked to him about it first anyway. But you know, to get greenlit, you have to do an outline, and I always do full script. But we've always had a really good kind of working relationship because you know we're friends. We've become friends by working together. And so yeah, I think mostly these days it's been a while since we've actually worked together on this stuff, but we'll be email for the most part. But back when we were doing comics together, it would be very much, we'd call each other up and we'd sort of swap ideas. And when I'd send in a script, one of the nice things about working with Jock is I don't have to over describe anything. I can just suggest, because I can see it in my head. When a story's working, I can see it in my head as if I'm remembering a movie I've seen, you know, and all I have to do is describe what happens in that movie. But I know I can kind of tell what each shot should be in terms of kind of angle and composition and stuff. But with Jock, I don't really over describe that stuff. I'm not really super prescriptive because I don't have to, because he just gets it. He knows what angle to use. He knows, and in that respect, we kind of click, you know. So we've got this visual shorthand together, and he would send, after I send him the script, he would send me these very rough thumbnail layouts, just, you know, to get any feedback. You know, does this work? And usually I'm just kind of like, yeah, that's great. I mean, sometimes I might be like, well, we maybe leave a little bit more space for dialogue in this panel or something like that. But for the most part, it just works, you know. And yeah, and so it's always a pleasure because he makes it easy and he makes me look good, you know.
It does seem like you guys do organically work well together, just based on The Losers and Green Arrow.
And Snapshot too. I love that story. Yeah. That's a great little crime miniseries that I greatly enjoy. I love the black and white aspect of it too.
I like it too. It vanished without trace. Nobody read it. You know, people just don't know it exists. It's still available.
We both own it, so we at least have it.
Yeah.
Tell your viewers, go out and buy Snapshot. It's by me and Jock, and it's awesome.
Okay. Watching that, actually go buy it. It actually is really good. We're not just saying that because Andy's here. I have it on my shelf, and I love it. We both reviewed it several months ago. We have a show called Crime Corner where we review specific crime comics. We've done The Losers on there. We've done Snapshot, and both are obviously things that we greatly enjoyed. So everyone should buy both of those series.
We will be reviewing this too on one of our crime corners.
That's another book I was really proud of, which vanished without trace. You know, it was probably too expensive in a weird format, you know, so people don't like that. But no, I like Victor Ibanez, the artwork he did for that. I love. He's so good. I have
almost all of these. What one do you think I'm missing, Taylor? Do you remember?
Do you have all the Road to Perdition stuff that they did?
I do.
I can't remember which one you're missing.
These are the yellow bottom labels like Area 10,
right?
Filthy Rich, Dark Entries, 90 Days.
Oh, Cowboys. That's what it was. Okay. Cowboys by Gary Phillips, I think, is the one you don't have.
That's the one I'm missing. Yeah, but here's some of the art.
This would be a perfect movie, too, I think. It was so cinematic.
Funnily enough, I keep promising my agent that I will turn it into a screenplay at some point.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
And I think he's been waiting. I keep promising and then not delivering. And he's been waiting for me so long. I suspect he's just given up on me completely. But yeah, like once I've finished my current project, which I can't talk about, the very next thing on my to-do list is to write a Ratcatcher screenplay, or actually finish the Ratcatcher screenplay I started writing ages ago. I keep getting sidetracked.
And I hope the movie's actually called Ratcatcher. That's a great title.
Well, there is a great movie called Ratcatcher already. So I may.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah. There's a Lynn Ramsey.
Well, I hope that this interview has motivated you even more to want to get to that screenplay. I would love to see that movie because it was so cinematic. There's so many twists and turns. You think the comic's one thing on one page, and the next page it twists it, and it does it at least 10 times.
Don't spoil the big twist. There's a big twist in the middle of Ratcatcher. Like I was talking before about story structure. I've always been a freak for kind of cinematic Hollywood story structure. And that Ratcatcher actually started off as something I was going to write as a film script first. And then when I got offered the opportunity to write a crime graphic novel, I was like, well, I have something in mind. But it doesn't really fit the traditional Hollywood structure because it's kind of a 2-act story instead of a 3-act story. It's got that, no spoilers, but it's got that big twist in the middle. So it's kind of leading up to that. And then it's everything proceeding from the ramifications of that. And I'm trying to figure out a way to still make that work, but without making Hollywood executives go, oh yeah, but you haven't got a big turning point on page 30. Because, you know, they love all that save the cat type, you know, Sid Field structure stuff. And you know, maybe sometimes to a degree that's maybe too specific. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out a way to do both, you know. And I'm getting, it's like I say, it's on my to-do list. I started writing it. I've got like sort of, I think a quarter of the way through it or something. And I started bumping into these structural issues, which I think, you know, I think it works. I think the comic pretty much works. And there's a lot of stuff I want to flesh out and improve upon. Like the characters, I think there's a lot of motivational internal stuff with the characters that I don't think I expressed very well in the comic. And I think that I could do a better job. But I've had like 10 years to mull it over now. So it's gone, oh, I know how to fix this. I know how to make it even better, you know. So I'm actually really looking forward to that.
Can you work in the name OmniDog into your script?
I think from now on, I'll be putting the name OmniDog in pretty much everything I write. I mean, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yay. One thing I loved about these books is that this was back when DC was really willing to take chances I think they put out, I can't remember how many they put out of these, 10 or 12.
13, I think.
13, and they put out the Big Little books, and then they put out this the Paradox Press books. That's where the Road to Perdition crime books were. They were really willing to experiment, and I don't, unfortunately, I don't see that from DC nowadays. But it was, I guess, it was kind of a branch off of the chance they took in the late 80s with Vertigo, or 90, or whenever Vertigo started. For like 20 years, they seemed to be willing to just mess with the format and try it and put stuff out there. And I really miss that kind of chance taking from a major publisher.
Yeah, me too. I miss it too. I mean, like I say, I was hugely inspired by Vertigo back in the day. You know, I grew up, I didn't grow up reading superhero comics. I grew up reading like 2000 AD over here in the UK, and then Warrior, which is where like things like V for Vendetta and Marvel Man first appeared. And then it was, I guess, mid 80s, about 85, 86. The first American comic I started reading regularly was Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. And I didn't even pay attention to who was writing comics back then. I'd seen it in a shop and liked the look of it, and instantly got hooked. And it didn't occur to me at the time that it was written by the guy who was writing Halo Jones and DR on Quinch in 2000 AD. And then, you know, and the first issue of Swamp Thing I ever read had John Constantine in it. I was like, I don't know what the hell is going on in this comic, but A, it's amazing, and B, I really like this chain-smoking English guy who's being sarcastic to Batman, you know. And so that's what led me off to discover the Forbidden Planet comic shop to go and find back issues and so on. And then, of course, you know, I think it was Alan Moore's Swamp Thing that really, you know, it's what he did in that book, or what they did in that book, and Bissett and Total Ben as well, kind of gave birth to Vertigo, really. You know, I don't think we would have Sandman and all the rest of it if it wasn't for what they had done in Swamp Thing. So as soon, I remember a British comic convention called UCAC, the UK Comic Art Convention. I guess it must have been late 80s when Karen Berger was attending in London. And they were doing the Eagle Awards, where the fans got to vote for, you know, their favorite comics, favorite whatever. And I'd voted for John Constantine as the character most worthy of his own series. And John Constantine won. And I was in the audience. I was like, yay, my guy won. And Karen Berger came up to receive the award for it on behalf of the DC crew. And she announced on stage that, well, I'm happy to announce that John Constantine is in fact getting his own spin-off series. It's going to be called Hellblazer. And everybody went nuts, you know, because, you know, we were all really digging that stuff. So yeah, and like I was reading Hellblazer from issue 1, and that was, you know, my favorite comic. That was like, my favorite character. I want to write this guy, you know. So the whole, and Jock wanted to draw him too, you know. So we both, you know, took a while. We actually, when we first approached Will Dennis, we were going to basically just produce our own like 6 or 8 page Hellblazer short story to try and impress him, because we thought we would have a harder time getting commissioned, frankly. So we thought if we just produce a finished comic, and like Hellblazer was the thing we both really wanted to do. And I actually came up with a story, but in the end, we didn't need to. It was easier to kick the doors in than we expected it to be, frankly. So we were lucky in that regard. But some of the idea for that Hellblazer story that I'd originally thought up, I ended up kind of recycling and using in my Hellblazer run. The story that was set in the Vatican was like a slightly expanded version of this original idea we'd come up with. But yes, I agree with what you're saying. Like I do miss, like the 90s Vertigo was just the best. There were so many great books and like interesting, experimental, weird, smart, challenging stuff, you know. Yeah, there was a few duds in the mix, but there have to be, you know, but their hit rate was so incredibly high with quality stuff, you know. It was just worth, I mean, like Preacher, I was a huge fan of Preacher. I remember reading the first issue of that and thinking, you know, again, I just felt like it's like this book is written just for me, you know. And yeah, I miss it too. I think the crime line didn't do as well as they were hoping. I think the fact that it was, you know, it's hardback digest, so a different kind of format from traditional, you know, American comic size, I think probably worked against it in the market. I think, you know, because I think they were trying to appeal to readers of crime novels rather than comic shop crowd. And I think it kind of fell between two stools a little bit, just in terms of the format, which is a shame because there are some really good books in that line.
And I think it's hard, probably, that they were all black and white, which doesn't bother me. I like the shading and stuff that you can get in black and white that a lot of times you can't get in color. But maybe the American audience had a problem with black and white. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I hear this a lot. You know, people have suggested that's why Snapshot didn't do as well as we'd hoped. But at the same time, you know, look how popular manga is in black and white. Look how popular The Walking Dead was. You know, everyone says, oh, Americans don't read black and white comics. And then Walking Dead just completely dominated the direct market, you know. So, like, nobody knows anything, you know. It's kind of like
Well, the question that Jess just asked about missing that aspect of Vertigo, it kind of ties into a question I wanted to ask. You know, the industry is obviously in a very interesting place right now, especially with the pandemic going on. You know, how would you like to see the industry evolve and change, especially as we do move out of the pandemic, hopefully in the somewhat near future?
I don't know. I'm not really the guy to ask. I just make up stories. I'm hopeless at the business side of it, the publishing side of it. It's weird. It kind of feels like, I mean, everybody's been talking for like the past 20 years about digital being the future or whatever, you know, but I'm kind of, I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see, I like seeing that Comixology, for example, have got this, it's not just repackaging, you know, big publisher stuff from Marvel and DC. They've also got this venue whereby, you know, independent creators can do stuff through them, and then reach this huge audience, because, like, you know, Amazon is this vast shop window, you know. But I also worry, you know. But I like books, you know, and I like comic shops, and you know, we've got fans and retailers. You know, local retailers rely on the direct market for their income and so on, and we can't just abandon them, you know. So it seems to me that it feels a bit like, I used to work in Blockbuster Video in the 90s, in the early 90s, like renting out VHS tapes. And then eventually, you know, VHS got replaced by DVDs, and then you started being able to, Netflix would rent you DVDs through the post, you know, and you could sort of see the business model changing. And like, maybe even back in like 2000, it was like, well, you know, before long, this is all going to be digital. Everybody's going to get these movies, you know, down a pipe straight to their home. So what's going to happen? Do you remember when we used to have like VHS mom and pop rental stores, you know? And it kind of seems to me that the same thing is happening to comic shops. The comic retailers now are in the position that those mom and pop VHS rental stores were in. And that's a scary place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that the retailers who have got their eye on the future, and obviously nobody knows what the future is, but it seems likely to me, you know, ignorant as I am, I'm no expert, so take it all with a pinch of salt. But it seems to me that the ones with the eye on the future are the ones who are evolving into graphic novel stores rather than monthly pull list stores. You know, people have been saying that, you know, the direct market is going to collapse forever. They always say that. You know, I don't know. I'm not the guy to ask. I don't know the numbers. But I have seen really excellent comic shops that really, really put the emphasis on graphic novels of whatever sort, whether they're collections of Marvel and DC or indie stuff or a mixture of the two. But the best ones put like an interesting mix of stuff that will attract Joe public, not just comic fans, in the window. Stuff that looks like, you know, nicely well-presented genre books of whatever sort. And then the pull list superhero stuff, they're still there, but they stick it in the back of the shop because they know that the fans know where to go and find it. They don't have to lure people in with that because those people already have a pull list, right? But that's not going to be enough to keep the direct market going, I don't think, in long term. How long that is, I don't know. So I think that it seems to me that the more we get the general public reading graphic novels, the better for the industry in the art form and the medium overall moving forward. I suspect eventually it will probably shake out to a digital first physical trade collection model. How long that will be, I've no idea. It might be next year. It might be 20 years. I literally have no idea. But that feels to me fairly inevitable.
Well, Jess and I both gave up on singles probably 5 or so years ago, and we favor collected editions because I think look better on the shelf, but also reading a collected whole, reading a story in one go.
Yeah.
Trying to read monthly, it's just hard to. It's like watching episodic television. It can be fun, but you forget stuff, and it's nice to just read it all in one go and get that whole middle, beginning, and end.
And reading a monthly book, it takes you like what 5-10 minutes to read the issue, and then you've got to wait a month to find out what happens next. But that's like watching The Sopranos when you only get to watch it 2 minutes a week or something. Not satisfying, you want something you can get your teeth into. So yeah, and like in Europe, obviously, I'm not talking about bande dessinée where they have these beautiful large format hardback graphic novels in every genre imaginable. That's great. But even their collections of American books, they do these nice big fat hardbacks. And like, I love a hardback. That's what I want on my shelf. And you see like, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips doing these nice hardbacks with their crime books. And again, like you say, they look great on the shelf. They feel great in your hand. And they're not full of adverts. Like you get a Marvel and DC.
Got them right over there.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Nice. And so, yeah, like, and when you're buying a monthly book, literally 50% of it is ads, and like, I understand the economics. They're necessary in order to keep it, financially viable. I get it, but I'm just, my personal preferences, I'd rather just get the trade,
Mm-hmm.
But the economics are tough for creators. But, people, if it was easy to produce your own comic and just self-publish it, then everybody would be doing it. But the economics of it are really tough, and distribution is tough. So I don't know. There are much smarter people than me trying to figure these things out. Who knows?
I know, Jess, you're a big Kickstarter supporter. I know a lot of creators have had success, especially over the past year with Kickstarter. I think that's a big future for a lot of creators right now too.
Yeah, I was taken by surprise when like 6 of my Kickstarters all came together in 1 month, which was this month, and I'm afraid to let my wife see the credit card bill because I wasn't paying attention. All of a sudden they published and they're coming to my house right now. So yeah, that I do like that model as far as getting stuff into my hands by people or publishers I may not have known of before.
Yeah,
it seems like I'm always finding something interesting to kickstart. But before I came on here, a friend of mine on Goodreads named Kurt said, if you like Diggle's Bond, you need to read Uncanny. And I said, Uncanny what? and I looked it up and it sounded great. So I found a great deal because volume 2 is very hard to find right now. But I found a great deal and I ordered both books, and it sounds great. I just wonder if you could, have you heard of this, Taylor?
Yeah, I've been meaning to pick them up. I believe both of them are still available. Maybe, I guess volume 2 isn't.
Well, it's available, but it's a little pricey. But I found it for a good price on my comic shop.
Oh, it's on In Stock Trades, Jess.
Number 1 is, yeah, but not number 2.
Number 2 is too. I'm looking at it right now.
What the hell?
That's where we order our comics, Andy, is from a website called In Stock Trades.
I wish I'd known that they were like valuable because I had a box load in the attic and I just sold them for like £1 each at comic shows and stuff. I haven't got rid of my attic anymore. I'm getting rid of this stuff.
Well, Jeff, that's how I'll pick them up. Thank you for letting me look that up.
I'm so bad at searching websites. I got them anyway I got them. But can you, just for the viewer that may not know about them, just kind of give the elevator pitch for Uncanny volumes 1 and 2?
Yeah, that wasn't my brainchild. Basically, Dynamite approached me and said that they wanted to do this. They were talking about doing like a line of crime comics, but like with a little bit of a twist. And they presented me with the premise, which is a guy who can steal other people's talents, but only for a short time, and he uses these talents to perform heists and missions of his own, kind of thing. So it's kind of a crime heist kind of vibe, but with just the sort of suggestion, not exactly superpowers, but like maybe something slightly supernatural going on. And I was like, well, actually that feels very me, because everybody knows I love heist type stuff and crime stuff, and but with a little bit of Hellblazer thrown in, kind of things. Like, yeah, that's cool. And I got to work with Aaron Campbell as well, who's fab. You know, I love working with that guy. He did Infidel with Pornside Picture. So yeah, he's a really good guy. So yeah, that was fun to do. But you know, it wasn't my pitch, and it wasn't my title. I came up with like half a dozen other titles for it, and they were like, "No, we're going to call it Uncanny." And I was like, "Well, I think it's the Uncanny X-Men or something." He's like, "No, it's going to be called Uncanny." Okay, fair enough. It's your book.
Well,
that's probably why it was so hard to search for it on In-Stock Trades, Jess, because there's probably so many Uncanny X-Men titles that popped up.
I saw Uncanny Volume 1, and then there was like 30 different Uncanny X-Men, and I thought, well, they don't have Volume 2. I'm going to have to hunt for it. But you're saying they're both on In-Stock Trades.
Right, so those of you who are watching right now, they're still available. Go get them.
Get Uncanny Volume 1 and 2.
That sounds awesome. And Aaron Campbell is a fantastic artist. I know he did the most recent run of Hellblazer with Cy Spurrier, I believe.
Yes, which was kind of like, you know, ranked the #1, you know, Critics' Choice for like the whole year or something like that. You know, they did this kind of Metacritic type ranking of all the reviews for comics, and it was the highest reviewed comic of last year.
It was one of my books of the year, and of course it got canceled.
Yep.
I hate
coming back to what you're saying about Vertigo. It's kind of like, you know, I mean, Hellblazer was my favorite comic, you know, and that was running for over 250 issues, and they pulled the plug. And then a few years later, they tried to get it up and running again, but it's like you already pulled the plug on it. It's a lot harder to get that fan base back once you've given them a reason to bail. You know, it's a shame. It's a real shame. I kind of felt like grieving when they cancelled Hellblazer. That felt like the final nail in the coffin somehow.
Yeah.
And DC tried to do it with New 52 and Rebirth. They tried to incorporate him into the DC universe. It just didn't work. But Cy Spurrier was that first creator since the Vertigo Hellblazer that finally got that formula back. And it finally was the John Constantine that we all know and love. Was that a difficult thing for you to settle into that Constantine voice when you were writing, or was it pretty easy to slip into?
It was the easiest character voice, because I'm from South London myself, you know, so like I know how he talks, you know, like it's it was completely natural for me, and I just love it. It was the best. I love that guy.
It was the first place that I ever picked up the term clean clobber.
Yeah.
Switching, he said, I came off the plane and switched into clean clobber, and I thought, that is slangier than the slangiest slang I've ever heard. What the hell does that mean? And I just assumed it meant clean clothes, but I don't actually care.
It does mean clean clothes, yeah.
Okay.
Clothes, yeah.
I go around saying clean clobber all the time to my wife, and she's like, "Wow."
It's interesting. The thing about like trying to bring it back into the DCU, some of the fans were kind of like, "Oh, he shouldn't be rubbing shoulders with superheroes," but of course he was to start with. You know, in the pre-Vertigo days, Constantine, when he first appeared in Swamp Thing, that was part of, you know, mainstream DCU. Excuse me. So, you know, like the first issue of Swamp Thing I ever read was the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover issue. Now, I didn't read superhero comics at the time, and this was where I had all these different superheroes and different realities all crashing into each other. I had no idea what was going on. It was baffling, but it was cool, and it had John Constantine being incredibly sarcastic to Batman, you know, and I'm like, I don't know who this English guy is, but he's cool, you know. So like, my Hellblazer, I just pretended there were no superheroes, you know. As far as I'm concerned, it's not really the DCU. I just didn't refer to it at all. It was kind of like denial, you know. But I'm not against the idea of Constantine being a player in that world, because that's his roots, you know. I just think it's very important how you approach it. I think if you start showing him as being like, you know, the Sorcerer Supreme shooting fireballs out of his hand, then that's not the guy. You know what I mean? And I'm trying to think of a single example from the Alan Moore run on Swamp Thing where we ever saw Constantine actually perform magic, because he was never presented as a magic user. He was never presented as a sorcerer or a wizard. He was basically, I mean, people always call him a con man as well, but that suggests he's trying to, you know, exploit people for his own gain. And yes, he's manipulative and he lies a lot, but in that American Gothic run, you know, he's manipulating people into helping him save the world, you know. And yeah, so his character has evolved a lot over the years. Also, he was a very sharply dressed guy back in those days. You know, he took a lot of meticulous care over his appearance. And somehow over the course of the Hellblazer run, he became shabbier and shabbier until he became this kind of, he looked like Columbo in this kind of like, you know. So something I wanted to address when I took over Hellblazer was actually just facing that head on and just, you know, having somebody tell him straight, you know, you look like a mess. You used to be a sharp dressed man and look at you now, kind of thing. And it was about him trying to get his mojo back, you know. But I was always careful about that, you know, the how and if he uses magic. You know, he might, you know, occasionally know how to follow a formula or something like that. But I didn't like the idea that, and I don't know. I got some of the covers for the new DCU, the pre-Cy Spurrier Hellblazer stuff in the DCU. Even just the covers, like, you know, look, here he is conjuring fire from his hand or whatever. It just felt like, I don't know, that's not the guy. You know, he's the guy behind the guy who can conjure fire from his hand. You know what I mean? He talks them into doing a suicide mission, but it's for the greater good because it saves the world. And then John's going to feel guilty about getting everybody killed, but he saved the world. And then he goes to the pub.
And he's always a very unlikable person to some degree.
Yeah,
like he's a total jerk. But again, he's doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, you know, like one of the first things he says to Swamp Thing back in the day was like, "I'm a nasty piece of work. Ask anybody." You know. But then later on in that story, when it's all coming to a head, and they're basically, you know, the great beast is about to awaken, and they're trying to stop heaven from being destroyed. Constantine, he's chained up in this pool of mud that's gradually kind of rising to his face, and he tells Swamp Thing, you know, "Don't stop me. Go and stop the bad guy, because then it's going to be the end of the world." And he basically, at that point, he's sacrificing his own life for the greater good. And Swamp Thing, being a big dumb hero, saves John instead because that's the immediate danger. But John was literally sacrificing his own life there. You know, that's the John Constantine that Alan Moore wrote. And, you know, yes, he's a nasty piece of work. Yes, he's manipulative and all the rest of it. But when push comes to shove, he's trying to do the right thing there, and he's being selfless, you know. And I think I would like to have seen more of that from other people's Constantines. You know, that seems to be a side of his character, that heroism, as a reluctant heroism, but as a contrast to all of the, you know, the manipulation and the sneering and the sarcasm and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I think Taylor's right, though, that after issue 300, the writers just couldn't find the right voice for him until Cy Spurrier, and I was so excited with Cy Spurrier's run, and it's hard. I think it's harder than it looks. It sounds easy to use since you're a writer, but as a reader, it seemed harder than it looks to write him, because I followed all his various incarnations, and it felt like Cy Spurrier was the first one since issue 300 to really get the tone of the character right.
I think maybe part of it is just, you know, where you're from. I mean, you know, Cy's a Brit like me, and it's easy to do a British voice if you're British. You know, like I've written like 99% of the characters I've written are American. But, you know, when I started writing American characters, and when I first started writing the Losers, I'd never been to America. You know, I just grew up watching American movies, but I'm faking it, you know. So I'm sure that in half of the stuff I've written, there's probably American idioms and slang and stuff that I've got wrong. But I don't know that, you know, until somebody points it out to me. I mean, you mentioned Ratcatcher earlier. A Texan pointed out to me that, like, my idea of Texan dialogue, he thought was terrible in one of those opening scenes. I'm like, okay, well, thanks for letting me know, you know. So I'm always aware that I might be messing this up. And sometimes I'm really not sure. So I'll tweet out, like, you know, do Americans actually use this phrase, this turn of phrase or whatever? And people will be like, yeah, you're all right. It's fine. But you never really know. But I think that sometimes if I'm reading like a British character written by somebody who's not from Britain, sometimes you can tell that it's not their first, you know, it's not their idiom, and it just clangs a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not accusing them. I'm not pointing a finger, because I'm saying, like, I'm sure I do that too the other way around. So, you know, it's just the job, you know.
Taylor, do you feel like you have some ending questions here? I think we've probably taken enough of Andy Diggle's time. You've been very generous with your time with us. We really appreciate it.
Where am I going to go, right?
This is where I'm going to be for the next 6 months again. So,
well, we always have some wrap-up lightning round questions for our creators that we'll throw your way. Then we'll say thank you and we'll head out. So one thing that Jess and I both really enjoy as we read comics or anything that we read is listening to movie soundtracks, listening to movie scores. I love to listen to jazz while I read comics. Whenever you write, are you in complete silence or do you have music in the background? And if so, what are you listening to?
I have tried doing the whole music background thing. I've talked to friends about this. In fact, talking to Cy Sparrow about it years back, I remember. I find music, I love music, but I find it very intrusive when I'm writing. I've recently discovered I've got ADHD, which explains why I'm so incredibly distractible. And I find that when I listen to music when I'm writing, I have tried listening to soundtracks and stuff, but I just start listening to the music instead of writing. Or if it's a film soundtrack, I start imagining that bit from the movie rather than the thing I'm supposed to be doing. What I have found works for me personally is, well, silence is great. But like sort of white noise of some kind is actually really good. Like I find like being on a train or a plane, not that I've done that recently, but I like that kind of ambient noise of that kind of thing. There's kind of website like what's it called? Rainy Cafe, where it's just the sound of background hubbub and rain on the windows, which is just kind of nice ambient noise. I had this conversation with Cy Sparrow about it years back, and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, white noise is okay, but try brown noise. That's even better." Brown noise? Yeah, Google it. It's a thing. It's just a different frequency of sound, but it just kind of really mellows out your mind somehow. And I find it's actually quite useful. But also, like sometimes I've got these kind of ambient apps on my phone that you can have a variety of different background sounds, like bird song or rain or whatever. And so for me, that stuff works best when I'm trying to get in the zone for writing.
As soon as we get off this interview, I'm going to listen to brown noise on YouTube.
That is the first thing I'm doing.
On a plane, basically.
So the next question that I have is that you can obviously see from our backgrounds that we're avid collectors of, action figure statues, comics, collected editions. Is there anything that you personally collect? Or
not really collect-wise. I can't really turn my computer around to show you, but I've got a few bits and bobs up on my shelf of things that people have made and given to me. Like a knitted owl bear from D&D. Aaron Campbell gave me like a little Mexican, Native American sort of figure. I've got an office down the road, which is where I've got like a Lego stuff. Being a bit of a nerd, I get Lego for my birthday and stuff like that. So I've got like a Lego Slave One and K2SO and stuff, and a big Iron Giant figure that used to belong to my son, but he didn't want it. I'm like, well, I'll have it because that's cool. Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a collector, but that's the nearest thing.
Well, Jess is about to venture into the world of Legos. Inexplicably, his wife dropped a Lego catalog in front of him and said, "Order one for your birthday."
Yeah, I've never have played with Lego before in my life, and she said, "Pick something out," and I said, "Okay, this looks great."
So it's really relaxing, man. Just building a big Lego thing is the most relaxing. It's like a Zen process. It's great.
I'll do it while listening to brown noise.
There you go. Yes. You may never come out of that state of mind that you find yourself in.
While you're building the Razor Crest in your basement.
Right.
So the last question I want to ask you, we talked a lot about all the comics that you've written. Are there any comics that you're reading now or things that you're being published by your friends that you really think our viewers should know about and read?
There's a few, actually. Homesick Pilots is worth checking out. Blue and Green by Ram V, and I'm forgetting the name of the artist, is worth checking out. Basically anything written by Ram V, Alex Packnadell, Cy Spurrier, Ollie Masters, or Dan Waters. Those guys at the White Noise crew, White Noise Studio, they're really good. Is that White Noise? Is that what they're called? Can't remember. Anyway, yeah, but those guys are really good. I would recommend them. And like Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips doing this new crime graphic novel series, they're always worth checking out.
Yeah, Reckless.
Yeah. And I like that. I like that format. That's a really nice format. We're talking about like, you want a self-contained hardcover. That's I think that's the future.
That's kind of going back to those Vertigo crime books. It's just a little bit bigger. It's that standard size.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the kind of comic I read.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Where can our viewers find you on social media?
Twitter is where I hang out when I'm supposed to be working. So I'm just Andy Diggle on Twitter. That's my thing. I'm always there. I shouldn't be. I should be spending more time offline so I can actually get some writing done. But that's the rabbit hole I fall down.
Well, we so appreciate your time. You were a great guest. I found everything you had to say very interesting, and I think the audience is going to be really thrilled and happy to get an interview like this. Something just where the writer has been able to just tell us exactly what's going on behind some of these books. And I appreciate your forthcoming, and I appreciate your coming on.
We'd love to talk to you again whenever we can talk about these new projects.
You'll be the first to know as soon as I'm finally out of my NDA. Yeah,
That's
I'll be
awesome.
happy. It's been fun.
And I'm
Great.
looking forward to the movie called OmniDog.
I'll see what I can do.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Peace and love. Peace and